Okay, so what we're going to cover is going to be quite different from what you've seen this morning, but we'll actually connect up quite a bit. When we started out on Imagining 2050, health and well-being really wasn't at the centre of our concerns. It was something that we knew was relevant, but it's something that really has emerged from the research that we've been doing. And the list of names, or the cast of thousands there, is just to indicate the wider groups that are involved. So the project is called Imagining 2050, Engaging, Envisioning and Co-producing Pathways to Low Carbon, Climate Resilient Ireland. And we're a transdisciplinary research consortium. Some of the aims of the project are really to consolidate existing research capacity in Ireland in terms of societal transitions, climate mitigation and climate adaptation, to engage with civic society to explore and co-develop future visions of and pathways to a low carbon and climate resilient future, and to use creative communication and engagement methods. So we're starting very much from a very different angle from some of the more global perspectives and some of the national perspectives that we've seen thus far this morning, but we do connect with them. So just to give you a sense of our team and the extended networks, we're linked in. We're primarily based in and around the Environmental Research Institute and University College Cork, but we're also linked with Queen's University Belfast and the Horizon 2020 Mistral postgraduate training programme. We're also linked to other projects like the Cleaner Production Promotion Unit in Trust Project, which is looking at energy citizenship and humans within the energy system, and current projects like energy polities. We also are cooperating, and part of our team are the Climate Ireland people in the Marine and Renewable Energy Institute. And indeed, we've worked very closely with the EPA, and particularly with the National Dialogue on Climate Action. And Alex has been working very closely as well with the Joint Programming Initiative on climate, really trying to emphasise the importance and ways in which the social sciences and the humanities could be integrated into very often what's regarded as a kind of a technical or a more natural scientific domain. So just to give you a sense of the timeline, and we're only going to deal with one very specific facet, and that's a case study in and around Athlone. We began in August 2018, and from June to December in 2019, we engaged with the Athlone community. Now, we're engaging with communities that have experience of or have been impacted by serious weather events in the past. So in places like Athlone, it's been things like flooding. In Ballincollig, we had very serious incidents, and I think there was a picture of it earlier on in 2009 with the flooding of Cork City. And we're going to look at the various different methods that we've engaged with there. Just last weekend, we were working with the Ballincollig community in a hotel that was actually closed as a result of the 2009 flooding. So again, that lived experience, that kind of that knowledge of what some of the impacts in the here and now are is quite important. And we're going to go on in February and August to look at coastal communities. So just to give you a sense of some of the work that we've done to date, we've held a number of different workshops and seminars where we've looked at various different innovative means of community engagement, primarily using visual methods, participatory mapping and so on. So we've had input from colleagues in Austria around work that they've done on land use. We also had a workshop where we were able to, I suppose, gather together and learn from the experience of previous projects. The Consensus project, I think, is mentioned in some of the literature at the back there. There are projects like Energize, a variety of different projects that are coming, really bringing a social science and humanities perspective into the process. And we published the proceedings of that workshop in May 2019. Also, we have, I suppose, tried to learn some of the lessons from the wider events around the Citizens' Assembly to see what relevance that might have at a local level. So Claudia Harris, who was involved there, is really looking at the connections between what's happening at the local level and the wider events with the Citizens' Assembly. Interestingly, what we're starting to see is increasingly universities and institutes of technology are beginning to engage with the Green Campus agenda and have been looking for ways in which they not only engage with their own constituents, in other words, their students and the lecturers and so on, but also the communities in which they're situated. And more recently, we had a guest speaker from Geneva who looked at informed citizens panels in Switzerland, so linking very much to the kind of direct democracy types of instruments that you have in the Swiss case. So in terms of the kind of engagements, what we've been doing is we've been working from the point of view of creating different types of personas that will be impacted by different facets of climate change. So for example, it may be a young teenage girl, it may be a farmer, it may be an elderly person and so on. So trying to get people to imagine the impacts of climate change from the perspective of other people, rather than necessarily looking at it from their own perspective and identifying maybe interests that they might have and so on. And we've used that then to storyboard potential problems and solutions within their local community. And built onto that process then, we've used various different types of technologies. So for example, like Slido, where we had real-time I suppose, engagement with different possibilities in terms of transportation and electricity generation up to 2050. But also then more physical activities, like using maps of the area to see where different changes could be implemented and the kind of things that they'd like to see that link things like health, well-being, but also trying to mitigate and trying to, I suppose, adapt to some of the consequences, predominantly things like flooding, but also air pollution as well and issues around transportation. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at what we've been using as a citizens' juries type process, and we use the word type there because we've been using things like word cafes, interactive formats of visualization, but also a more deliberative communication approach. And Alex is going to go on now and talk to you about some of the activities between June and October and how that links to some of the themes of today's conference.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to give a brief overview of some of the preliminary findings from our community engagements in the community of Athlone. So this is our first community. As Ger has shown, we're hoping to do this work in different sort of contexts. Ballincollig in Cork is one of them, is a suburban town. And we hope to move on to a coastal community, which we haven't identified as of yet. So moving on then to Athlone in terms of preliminary findings. As Ger was mentioning, we're using very much a sort of a deliberative communication ethos to look at ways in which we can engage communities at local level. And I suppose in a very summarized way, we're kind of trying to evaluate whether this would be a good idea to kind of transpose the very successes or the very successful ways in which the Citizens' Assembly has been beneficial in Ireland to a sort of community, more localised level. But we, in doing that, are using quite innovative ways of engaging with people and have a sort of deliberation that's not just based on your conventional sort of verbal communication, and we try to use quite visual sort of interactive materials as well. So just to give you a sense there, we have empathy mapping, the physical sort of more, mapping and remapping of a local area. We have brainstorming pathways, we have audience polls, we have a sort of more physical ballot engagement as well. And finally, we made use of a participatory evaluation process to kind of get a sense of how people feel, how this process goes. So, not just having the sort of top-down approach in terms of evaluating how this goes, but having very much the sense from people that participate in this, how they feel this can be beneficial. So we start this deliberation process, and it's sort of a staged process of information giving, deliberation in the form of sharing, as well as kind of engaging with other views and perspectives, and decision making. And within this, we try to sort of get a sense of what climate change means for people in different areas. And in Athlone, these bubbles represent, I suppose the wider bubbles there represent areas really that people have fixed their meaning in terms of climate change. And you can see there that uncertainty, the unnatural sort of phenomena of climate change, and flooding are three core issues for the people in Athlone. And I suppose from a decision-making perspective, from a policymaker's perspective, and from a research perspective, it really tells us that we need to be much more explicit about what we know about climate change, what we don't know, and allow for a greater perception, I suppose, of control individually and collectively, because, you know, it can create, this sense of uncertainty can be quite paralyzing. So just in terms of the empathy mapping, just to give you a brief overview, we try to look at the citizen of the future and we try to identify potential impacts. But not only that, this is just a kind of a brief flavor of some of the information we're doing. For example, in Ballincollig, people went as far as giving names to these future citizens and, you know, learning where they live, what they work, what they eat. And I think this is really important in terms of communication, because we are targeting our communication, we're personalizing our communication, and that is very powerful for people to kind of sort of get a sense and identify. And it's also quite instinctive, I feel, in terms of understanding what the potential impacts of climate change are. So, for example, for an older person here, this person would be living in an old house, and that could be problematic for a number of reasons in terms of climate change, including being cold, being more at risk of flooding issues. Connection with others was identified as problematic. Going cold was another issue, and access to healthy foods and the rising costs of living in general. And I suppose from a health perspective, that's really important from the, you know, if you're older, you might have special dietary requirements, and that can be very problematic. If you're older, controlling pain and controlling illness, you know, having a nice, comfortable environment is very important. So that's quite problematic there. For your younger person then, uncertainty, mental health issues and undefined life paths were really seen as something that are quite interconnected and very problematic. We kind of have a sense of how we see our lives. We grow, we go to school, we get a job, we raise a family. But I think that climate change puts a lot of that in disarray. So that was kind of really interesting to tease out. And there's a lot of kind of great information coming from this in terms of the level of detail that people are getting that can help us get a greater understanding of how climate impact can affect different cohorts in society and individuals at local level. So from a mapping and remapping point of view, we created alongside with the Marai Research Centre in particular, and I should mention Barry O'Dwyer, Stephen Flood and Amy Dozier, we created bespoke maps of Athlone where we kind of had a range of landmarks, but we kind of left the map quite raw so that people could identify areas that they know and areas that they want to change. And this is just sort of a brief overlook of some of the things that people populated their map with. This one is particularly relevant in relation to mobility being a really big issue for people, and not just in terms of the challenge of looking for alternatives to, you know, our car dependency, but also in terms of health, in terms of how they can improve our well-being, getting out of our cars, finding new ways, connecting with the community, and creating a healthier sort of environment, biodiversity at community level. A really interesting thing there as well, and I think Anna is going to talk about that in terms of food, is reclaiming the market square. The market square, and it talks about our car dependency, in Athlone is now a car park, and it literally doesn't exist. But people are trying to fight back, and in the morning on a Saturday, before the cars arrive, people are putting in their stalls with healthy food and really looking to kind of develop that sense of connection in those networks that are so important in terms of community development. So just in terms of brainstorming pathways, we created a whole range of activities where we're trying to identify specific issues that people wanted to look at, breaking down some of those issues, and then looking at some potential pathways to address some of these issues. Health was identified quite as a strong thing in the Athlone perspective, and I must say that we did a pre-community survey before we engaged on these more detailed initiatives, and health was identified as a top priority for people. And I think from here you can see that health services as a thing are seen as really important, and I think it should be mentioned here in the sense that climate change is a stressor for society. It has a potential to create enormous vulnerabilities, but it also can be a sort of a social statement when something like a flood happens, that we see where our vulnerabilities are. So for example, in terms of the health sector, if we have a strong, resilient health sector, that should kind of come to bear fruits in terms of our resilience more generally. So that's just another example of brainstorming activities where people looked at the issue of health from the point of view of connection with others. And I must say that from both pathways development, emphasis on primary care, emphasis on prevention, and emphasis on building that sort of resilience, on building that sort of strong social infrastructure that you need to be able to cope with something like the stressors of climate change have been really identified. So in terms of identifying and imagining an Ireland for 2050, there isn't that sort of futuristic vision of, flying cars and amazing technologies. There's that really strong emphasis on getting the basic social structures right so that we have, a strong, resilient community to cope with the stressors that are coming our way. So, as I said, we kind of engaged in these deliberative processes, and part of that was information giving, and we had a range of our experts from the Imagining 2050 project giving a range of presentations to people in Athlone. Some of them looked at the past. We also discussed the Sustainable Development Goals. We looked at the socio-economic pathways and other things, but we moved on into to learning together, deliberating, and then coming up with some hard decisions. And this is how we finished our community engagements in Athlone through a ballot. And this was done in conjunction with work with Dr. Clodagh Harris. She's part of our Imagining 2050 project, and it was very much drawing from insights and learnings from the Citizens' Assembly, which also used a ballot format to come up with some strong decisions towards the end. So just to give you a flavour, we had 9 questions altogether, and some of these are these are 2 of the questions that we looked at. One of them is, in the context of the move to decarbonise our energy system and build resilience, please rank the following in the order of importance. And the top one there is the rank 1, and that's public transport. And public transport emerged as something that people are really considering as something that's really strong in terms of doing something about climate change in Ireland. And again, it appeared in terms of considering some suggestions for the future. In Athlone, this is specific to Athlone, again, public transport is seen as a really important thing to consider. In terms of a participant evaluation, I'm not going to go through it at all. I see my red light there. So we did ask people what they thought about the community engagements. Do they see value in this? What did they see they kind of got out of it? In terms of a question, did you change your views as a result of the table discussions? We didn't really seem to have changed people's views in relation to climate change or to have become quite provocative in anything that so people said that neither agree or disagree seemed to be the kind of balance of that. But when we asked people that from attending this event, if they were more encouraged or motivated to continue to participate in climate change issues, everybody agreed that they were definitely much more encouraged to take part in more climate change activities, and they had a new sense of hope and could understand things they could do in the future. So just in terms of concluding comments, there's a whole range, as I said, of things that we can consider in terms of developing these engagements. Innovation, self-determination, linking to social justice, interfacing with different types of knowledge are some of those, and we're teasing those out with different communities, trying to evaluate what is the real value of promoting these deliberative engagements at community level. And that's us. You can see all our contacts detailed there on a website with more information.